One thing is for sure when it comes to springtime bass fishing. Every time you're on the lake, river, or pond, something is different. Hi there, welcome to the Bass Fishing Life. I'm your host, Steve Rogers. Hey, before that video gets going, make sure that you hit that subscribe button and punch the notification bell. And also be sure to head on over to our blog site, thebassfishinglife.com as well. Thank you so very much. Well, springtime bass fishing, as all of you are well aware of, changes constantly, and I'm not just referring to the weather. Today you can probably tell it's extremely windy, which is why I'm staying here in the driveway to try to go over this today. But the lakes, ponds, and rivers are changing constantly in their composition and the cover that is available. Every time you go out, there could be something different. The water could be higher because it's a lot of rain and flooding. It could be lower because all of a sudden we have some days of non-rain, or it hasn't rained and the dam operators are pulling water through. If you have lakes and rivers with vegetation, it seems like every time we go out there, the vegetation is a little bit taller, a little bit thicker, or depending on your situation, you may have a lake that's controlled by an association and they've already done some weed control. So now the weeds are dying already and summer has not even gotten here yet. So every time you're out there, things are different. Well, one of the best tools that we have as bass anglers is to use a jig. And as you well know, there are so many jigs out there and a wide variety of trailers that you can put on them. But what I want to go over today is if I'm going to do things right, okay, and I'm going to go ahead and set up my jig fishing arsenal correct to run across whatever situation I might hit out on the water, this is how I'm going to do it, or this is what I would do. So that's what I want to talk about today, is having multiple jig rods ready to go that will cover every situation that you could possibly run into. Now, depending on your budget and depending on how many rods you have available, some of you may scale this up, some of you may scale this down, but today I'm going to be specifically talking about rigging up 4 or 5 jig rods on the boat deck that are ready, and I can just put one down and pick up the other based on what I am seeing in front of me. So let's go ahead and really break this down in detail, and my plan is to show you a lot of underwater footage as well so you can see what I'm talking about and why I would pick certain jigs over another based on the situations I'm coming across. So the first one I'm going to have rigged up on a rod is definitely a swim jig. We had a couple videos ago where I was talking about the Alabama Shake, and we mentioned that the swim jig is really effective in the pre-spawn, during the spawn, and the post-spawn, especially in this color pattern, because bass hate bluegills during the spring. They're constantly raiding their nests, and if I can match that forage and irritate a bass just with the sight of a bluegill, that is a plus for me in the angler column. It's a win. So I'm gonna have a swim jig tied on, and I could throw this in just about any situation I run across, but I really like to focus on the swim jig when I hit some weeds that are a little bit taller, they're a little bit thicker, and it is not as easy for me to get a jig down to the bottom without getting hung up constantly. That is when I'm going to go ahead and put a swim jig on. As you can tell by the slender head design, it comes through the grass and comes through the vegetation really well. I'll also put a swim jig on if I'm coming to a new part of a lake or a river that I'm not really familiar with and I want to really cover some water, and then all of a sudden use this as a search bait to see if I can get some bass to reveal themselves, even if they're smaller in size, because I know they're probably going to be grouped up right now in this pre-spawn and early spring situation. So one rod is going to have a swim jig on it for sure, no doubt. The next one that I'm going to have rigged up and ready to go is a skipping jig. So this jig is going to be a little bit heavier, anywhere from 3/8 to a 1/2 ounce, or the swim jig I should say is going to be 1/4, is what I use all the time with the twin tail grub. But my skipping jig is going to be bulky, okay? On here I've got a nice flat trailer. This is a rodent. I could shorten this trailer up if I wanted to make it even more bulky, but I left this one full length because I wanted these appendages to swim to if I chose to do that on the way back to the boat. But a skipping jig is going to give me the opportunity to shoot up underneath some docks, trees, brush if I run across an area where I see the bass are really shallow and starting to get up tight underneath that cover. As a matter of fact, when I was out last week, even though it was only about 38, 39 degrees out, I saw several 3 and 4 pound bass way up in shallow water. I'm talking less than 10 inches of water underneath overhanging brush, and they were kind of doing that pre-scout thing for the spawn, checking some nesting areas. So if I run across a nice overhanging dock, tree, brush, I'm going to have a skipping jig that is ready to go. I'm not going to be using this one a lot probably, but when I get the right situation, I'm going to put down another rod, pick up the skipping jig and shoot it up underneath there. And I'm still kind of mimicking that bluegill look. I got some chartreuse in there. It's mainly green, some darker colors. So skipping jig is on rod number 2. Now the third and fourth rod that I've got rigged up, oftentimes are going to be the same style of jig, and those are going to be some football heads. This one is a finesse football head, and this one is a little bit heavier at a 1/2 ounce. And the reason I have 2 different sizes is depending on the depth that I come across. If I'm working down that shoreline and all of a sudden things really drop off, I'm going to pick up that heavier football jig. Or if I work my way around a point and the wind is just pounding me and I can't feel the lure as well, I'll pick up that heavier jig. But I'm a big finesse jig guy. I love using finesse jigs. So this one here, this finesse football jig, is just an absolute favorite of mine. And where I'm going to use these football style heads is going to be more of an open bottom, preferably if I can run across a sandy or a rocky bottom. That is where I'm going to pull some football heads, working through riprap. I'll even use it through some muck if it's not too thick and too heavy, but I'm going to save this style of head design for more open, clean bottom areas in the lake. It's hard to beat a gravelly, hard bottom in a football head. It just works really, really well. And the last rod that I'm going to have rigged up is going to be more of a traditional flipping jig style head. This one is actually a bitsy flip jig, and the bitsy flip means it's got a little bit heavier hook on it. But this style of head right here comes through grass much better than a football head does, and I'm going to use this jig when I run across areas where there's some vegetation starting out. So the weeds are maybe 6 or 8 inches tall, and a football jig might hang up in that a little bit better. This style of head is going to pull through that grass and that slimy stuff a little bit better. And this type of flipping jig, when I bounce it on my way back to the boat, I might give it a little more hopping action to it, some small hops, where the football jig, this is going to be more of a drag. Okay, just we've talked about, especially in winter fishing videos, dragging a jig. So this style of head, the football head, I'm going to drag. The flipping head, I'm more apt to hop it, give it small hops on the way back to the boat. Okay, so these are the 4 to 5 jigs that I'm going to have rigged up and on my boat deck at all times. I can put one down, pick up another one, depending on the situation that I run across. Now, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of times where I've just got one jig rod and I'm using that one jig in all of these different situations, but it's not as efficient as when I've got a jig designed for each one. A skipping jig does a much better job of getting under cover. A swim jig comes through the water and holds its position much better than if you were trying to swim with a traditional flipping style of a jig. So yes, we can do all these things with one model, but it's more efficient to have multiple rods, jig rods, rigged up and ready to go. And like I said, depending on your budget, you may scale up. Maybe you've got 6, 7, or 8 ready to go, or maybe you've just got 2. So you're gonna pick 2 of those and have those on your boat deck or with you as you're working down the shoreline. Now, as far as the actual rod and reel setup, okay, I've still got a swim bait on here, but all of my rods for the flipping jig, the finesse flipping jig, the swim jig, and these football jigs in this clearer water, I'm going to have braid with a fluoro leader. But the skipping jig, I'm just going to go straight braid all the way. Most of those bites come pretty quick, and I'm not worried about the bass seeing the line per se, because I'm throwing it up there quick. It surprises them and they usually react to it. So I have one rod that is just straight braid, and then the rest I'm going to have braid and glow, and the rest of them I will have braid and going to a fluoro leader, usually somewhere 10 to 15 pounds, because I spend the most of my time on really ultra clear water. So hey, make sure that you drop in the comments down below what are some of your favorite jig setups for different situations that you run across. And if you have the ability to set up several rods, I think you're going to find that you can efficiently pick apart the cover that you run across much better, and as a result get more bites because of it. Hey, don't forget to go out and encourage someone today. You never know what a difference you might just make in their life. For the Bass Fishing Life, I'm your host, Steve Rogers.